The most powerful man in the city was about to die at his own dinner table, and the person who would save him was the one everyone ignored. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below, and if you believe kindness can change even the darkest hearts, hit like and subscribe. Now, back to Alexander Kim. The Kim estate had hosted thousands of important nights, political meetings, business negotiations, private gatherings where billionaires whispered behind crystal glasses and powerful men made decisions that could change entire industries. But nothing in the grand mansion that evening compared to what was about to happen inside the dining room. The room was a masterpiece of wealth and control. A massive chandelier hung above a table carved from dark Italian wood. Golden candlelight reflected across polished silverware, expensive wine glasses, and the quiet faces of security personnel standing near the walls. At the center of it all sat Alexander Kim, a man whose name carried fear throughout the city. A Korean Mafia boss known for his intelligence, his discipline, and his ability to control an empire without raising his voice. His yellow-toned skin contrasted against the black suit covering his powerful frame. Dark tattoos extended from his neck beneath his collar, disappearing across his body like stories he had never told anyone. Every movement was controlled, every expression unreadable. To most people, Alexander Kim was untouchable, a man who had survived enemies, betrayals, and years surrounded by danger. But tonight, the greatest threat was sitting across from him. His wife, Victoria Kim, smiled elegantly as she lifted her wine glass. To another successful year. Her voice was warm. Her expression was perfect. Almost too perfect. Alexander raised his glass slightly. He trusted very few people in his world. But his wife had always been the exception. At least, that was what he believed. Standing near the dining room entrance was Amelia Carter, a black waitress hired to serve the private dinner. She kept her eyes lowered, moving quietly between guests, refilling glasses and arranging plates. She had learned long ago that people like her were often noticed only when something went wrong. Rich guests saw the uniform before they saw the person. Powerful people saw her position before they saw her humanity. So Amelia stayed quiet, invisible, until something made her stop. As she reached the table to replace Alexander's empty glass, a strange scent caught her attention. Not wine, not perfume, something bitter, something familiar. Her fingers tightened around the tray. She looked at the glass, then at Alexander. The man everyone feared. The man who seemed impossible to defeat. Something was wrong. "Excuse me, sir." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Alexander looked up. His sharp eyes immediately focused on her. A waitress speaking directly to him was unusual. "What is it?" Amelia hesitated. She knew what happened when people crossed powerful men. She knew her place. But she also knew what happened when innocent people stayed silent. "Please don't drink anymore." The entire room seemed to freeze. Victoria slowly turned toward her. The smile disappeared from her face for only a second. But Amelia noticed. And that small moment was enough. Because the woman who had spent years learning how to stay invisible had just seen something nobody else noticed. Fear, hidden behind a perfect smile. Alexander studied Amelia carefully. A poor waitress. A stranger. Someone nobody in that room considered important. Yet she was the only person looking at him like a human being instead of a legend. Then, before anyone could react, Alexander's hand moved toward his chest. The glass slipped from his fingers. It shattered against the marble floor, and the most feared man in the city collapsed before the eyes of everyone who believed nothing could ever bring him down. The entire mansion froze when Alexander Kim collapsed. For a man who had built an empire through discipline and control, the sound of his body hitting the marble floor was something no one inside the room was prepared to hear. The crystal chandelier continued glowing above them. The candles continued burning. The expensive dinner remained untouched. But everything else changed. Mr. Kim, the security team, moved instantly. Chairs scraped against the floor as trained guards rushed toward him. The same men who had watched him face enemies without fear now looked shaken as they surrounded their leader. Victoria Kim stood beside the table with one hand covering her mouth. Her expression was perfect. Concerned. Terrified. Almost convincing. "Call the doctors," she whispered. Within minutes, the private medical team assigned to the estate arrived. They checked Alexander's pulse, his breathing, his blood pressure. The room filled with urgent voices and medical equipment. But the answers were the same. We don't understand. One doctor frowned at the results. His symptoms don't match any normal condition. Another looked at the others. His body is reacting as if something toxic entered his system. The room became silent. Toxic. The word hung in the air. Amelia Carter stood near the wall, still holding the serving tray against her chest. She watched carefully. She watched the doctors. She watched the guards. Then she looked at the broken wine glass lying on the marble floor. Something about it bothered her. She had spent years learning things most people ignored. Her grandmother had taught her that healing was not only about medicine. It was about paying attention. The smallest details often revealed the biggest truths. The strange smell. The bitter aftertaste. The way Alexander's hands had tightened before he collapsed. This wasn't a sickness. It was something else. Excuse me. Her voice was quiet, almost lost among the panic. Nobody listened. A guard stepped between her and the medical team. Stay back. Amelia lowered her eyes. She understood. She was only the waitress. The woman who carried plates. The person people noticed only when they needed something. But then she looked at Alexander again. His face had lost its usual strength. The man everyone feared looked suddenly human. And Amelia couldn't walk away. Please, she said again. This time louder. The room turned. A few guards looked annoyed. One doctor sighed. Miss, this is not the time. Amelia stepped forward carefully. I don't think he is having a medical emergency. Everyone stared. What are you saying? One guard asked. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. I'm saying someone poisoned him. The room went completely silent. Victoria's expression changed for the briefest moment. Only a second, but Amelia saw it. Fear. Real fear. The doctor shook his head. That's a serious accusation. I know. Do you have proof? Amelia looked toward the broken glass. No. She paused. But I have a reason. A few people exchanged doubtful looks. A waitress accusing someone at a billionaire's dinner? It sounded impossible. Unbelievable. Almost disrespectful. Victoria stepped forward with a cold smile. Alexander's condition is serious, and I don't think we should waste time listening to staff members making guesses. The word staff landed heavily. Not a person, not a witness, just staff. Amelia felt every eye in the room judging her. But she didn't move, because she knew something none of them understood. Sometimes the person standing farthest from power was the only one close enough to see the truth. Then, from the floor, Alexander's fingers moved slightly, barely noticeable, but Amelia saw it. His eyes opened halfway, weak, unfocused, yet searching. He looked directly at her, the woman nobody believed. And with the last strength he had, Alexander slowly lifted one hand. A silent command. Let her speak. The room went silent when Alexander Kim lifted his hand. A man who had spent his entire life commanding others with a single look was now barely strong enough to move his fingers. But that small movement carried more authority than any order ever could. Let her speak. The words came through his security officer after reading Alexander's gesture. Everyone looked at Amelia Carter, the black waitress standing near the dining table, the woman everyone had ignored only moments earlier. The doctors exchanged uncertain glances. One of them stepped forward. Mr. Kim is in critical condition. We cannot allow random guesses to interfere with treatment. Amelia nodded. She understood. She knew how impossible she sounded. A waitress with no medical title, no expensive education, no powerful family name, standing in front of some of the most influential people in the city and claiming she knew something they didn't. But truth had never depended on someone's status. I understand, Amelia said quietly. Her eyes moved toward Alexander. But I know what I saw. The doctor crossed his arms. Then explain. Amelia took a slow breath. She walked carefully toward the dining table while several guards watched every movement. The broken wine glass remained on the marble floor. A small piece of crystal caught the candlelight. Almost invisible. Just like her. She crouched down and looked at it. The smell. Everyone stared. The smell. Amelia nodded. When I replaced his glass, I noticed something unusual. She looked toward the bottle. The wine itself wasn't the problem. She pointed toward the glass. It was added afterward. A few people whispered. Victoria's expression remained composed. Too composed. Amelia continued. I have seen symptoms like this before. One guard frowned. You? She stood slowly. My grandmother worked as a community healer. She helped people who couldn't afford doctors. I spent years learning from her. The guard looked skeptical. You're saying you can identify poison? Amelia shook her head. No. A pause. I'm saying I can recognize when someone's body is fighting something it shouldn't have. The room became quieter. Alexander's breathing remained weak. Every second mattered. Amelia looked at the doctors. His pupils. They checked immediately. His heartbeat. They looked at the monitor. The way his muscles tightened before he collapsed. The doctors exchanged concerned looks. Because now, they were noticing the same things. One doctor stepped closer to Alexander. She may be right. Victoria turned sharply. What? The doctor ignored her. His reaction pattern does suggest a toxin. The atmosphere changed. The woman who had been dismissed moments earlier had just identified the possibility that trained professionals had missed. Amelia moved closer to Alexander. She could see the pain behind his eyes. The fear, not of dying, but of losing control. Men like Alexander Kim built their entire lives around never showing weakness. Yet now he was surrounded by people waiting to decide his fate. Except one person. One person who saw him differently. Not as a mafia boss. Not as a powerful man. Just a human being in pain. I need his permission, Amelia said. Everyone looked confused. What? I won't do anything without his approval. The room became still. Even now, when she had the chance to prove herself. She wasn't trying to gain power. She was asking for trust. Alexander slowly opened his eyes. His vision was blurred. But he understood. The Black Waitress was asking him for permission when everyone else was making decisions around him. With the last strength he had, he moved his hand. One small gesture. Yes. The doctors prepared to assist. The guard stepped aside. And for the first time that night, the most powerful man in the room placed his life in the hands of the person everyone believed mattered the least. Amelia reached for the medical supplies. Her hands trembled, but her eyes remained steady, because she knew something everyone else had forgotten. Healing was never about having the most power. It was about having the courage to care when everyone else looked away. The room held its breath as Amelia Carter began the impossible task. The Black Waitress stood beside the most feared man in the city, surrounded by doctors, security guards, and powerful people who had spent their entire lives believing they were the ones with answers. Yet now, every person in that room was watching her, not because they trusted her, because Alexander Kim had. Amelia carefully examined the symptoms while the medical team monitored his condition. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. She remembered the lessons her grandmother had repeated countless times. Listen to the body before you try to fix it. The body always told the truth. She looked at Alexander's hands. The slight trembling, the tension in his fingers, the unusual breathing pattern. Then she looked back at the wine glass. There is something called a delayed reaction, Amelia explained quietly. The doctors listened. Some substances don't affect the body immediately. They wait until they enter the bloodstream. One doctor frowned. You believe the poison was in the wine? Amelia shook her head. Not exactly. She pointed toward the glass. I believe it was designed to look like an accident. The room became colder. Everyone understood what that meant. Someone had not only wanted Alexander Kim harmed. Someone had planned it. Victoria remained beside the table, her expression controlled. You are making serious accusations without evidence. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. Amelia looked at her. I didn't accuse anyone. A pause. I only said someone wanted him to believe this was a normal dinner. For the first time, Victoria's confidence weakened. Only slightly, but enough. Alexander's security team noticed. They noticed everything. The head of security stepped forward. Searched the dining area. Within seconds, guards began checking the table, the bottle, and every item connected to the meal. Amelia continued working. She prepared a treatment based on what she recognized, explaining each step to the doctors. She wasn't replacing them. She was helping them see what they had missed. That difference mattered. Because Amelia didn't want power. She wanted a life saved. Minutes passed like hours. The mansion remained silent except for the sound of medical equipment. Then one of the doctors looked up. The toxin level is decreasing. Everyone turned. What? The doctor checked the monitor again. Whatever she did, it's working. A wave of disbelief moved through the room. The woman they had dismissed as only a waitress had just done what expensive specialists could not. But Amelia barely reacted. Her eyes stayed on Alexander. Because he wasn't just a powerful man anymore. He was someone whose life depended on the decision she made. Slowly, Alexander's breathing became steadier. His eyes opened. The first thing he saw was Amelia. Not his security team. Not his wife. Not his doctors. Her. The woman who had stepped forward when everyone else stepped back. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Alexander's weak voice finally came. Why? The question was barely audible. Amelia looked confused. Why did you help me? She looked down for a moment. Because the answer was simple. Because someone had to. I couldn't just watch you die. Alexander stared at her. In his world, every action had a price. Every favor had a hidden reason. But this woman had risked everything and expected nothing. A quiet realization appeared in his eyes. The person everyone overlooked had been the only person who saw him clearly. Then Alexander slowly turned his gaze toward the shattered wine glass. His expression changed. The weakness disappeared. The mafia boss was returning. But this time, he wasn't searching for an enemy. He was searching for the truth. And somewhere inside the mansion, the person responsible for poisoning him realized one terrifying fact. Alexander Kim was alive. And now he knew someone had betrayed him. 3 days after the poisoning, the Kim estate remained quieter than it had ever been. The same mansion that once echoed with business meetings, powerful conversations, and confident footsteps now carried a different atmosphere. Suspicion. Every person inside the house knew one truth. Someone close to Alexander Kim had tried to kill him. And that truth changed everything. Alexander sat in his private study, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The evening lights reflected against the glass, but his attention was elsewhere. A single question had consumed him since the night of the attack. Who had betrayed him? The answer was not simple. In his world, enemies were expected. Rivals. Competitors. People who wanted his power. But poison at his own dinner table? That required something more dangerous. Trust. Across from him stood his head of security, Marcus Reed. We checked everyone who entered the estate that night. Alexander's expression remained cold. Results. No outside threats. A pause. Which means Marcus didn't finish. He didn't need to. Alexander understood. The betrayal came from inside. At that moment, there was a quiet knock on the door. Amelia Carter entered carrying a tray of tea. Even after everything that happened, she still looked uncomfortable walking through the mansion's halls. She had saved his life, yet she still moved like someone afraid of taking up too much space. Alexander noticed. Most people who entered his world wanted something. Money, protection, influence. Amelia wanted nothing. She simply wanted people to survive. You don't have to serve anymore, Alexander said. Amelia stopped. I know. Then why are you still doing it? She looked down at the tray. Because healing someone doesn't stop after they open their eyes. For the first time in days, Alexander had no immediate response. The woman who had walked into his life as a waitress continued surprising him. Marcus quietly placed a folder on the desk. We found something. The atmosphere changed instantly. Alexander opened the folder. Inside were financial records, private messages, and access logs from the night of the dinner. Amelia noticed his expression shift. What is it? Alexander didn't answer immediately, because the truth was already becoming clear. The poison wasn't random. The timing wasn't random. The location wasn't random. Someone had planned every detail. Marcus pointed to the records. Someone accessed the private wine collection 2 hours before dinner. Alexander's eyes narrowed. Who? Marcus hesitated. Then he placed another document on the desk. A security authorization form. Signed by Victoria Kim. The room became completely silent. Amelia looked at Alexander. For a moment, the powerful man disappeared. Not the mafia boss. Not the man feared by everyone. Just a husband realizing the person beside him had been the greatest danger. Impossible, he whispered. It was the first time Amelia heard uncertainty in his voice. Marcus remained silent. Because sometimes the truth hurt more when it came from evidence instead of enemies. Alexander closed his eyes briefly. Years of memories passed through his mind. Every celebration, every promise, every moment he believed he had found someone who truly understood him. Then one small detail caught Amelia's attention. The glass. Everyone looked at her. She stepped closer. The poison was added before dinner, but the person who prepared the table wasn't trying to kill him immediately. Marcus frowned. What do you mean? Amelia studied the documents. If they wanted him gone quickly, they would have used something stronger. A pause. They wanted him weak first. Alexander looked at her. Why? Amelia's expression became serious. Because they needed time. The room went silent. Time to take control. Time to move money. Time to change something inside his organization. Alexander slowly stood. The weakness from 3 days ago was gone. The mafia boss had returned. But something was different now. Before, he searched for enemies outside his walls. Now, he knew the most dangerous person had been standing beside him all along. And somewhere inside the mansion, Victoria Kim realized something terrifying. Alexander was no longer fighting for his life. He was searching for the truth. The truth was no longer hiding. It was waiting. 3 days after Alexander Kim survived the poisoning, the Kim estate transformed from a place of luxury into a place of investigation. Every hallway, every room, every person inside the mansion carried the weight of suspicion. Because the question remained the same. Who tried to kill the man everyone feared? Victoria Kim sat alone in the master bedroom, staring at the city lights through the enormous windows. For years, she had mastered the art of appearing untouchable. The perfect wife. The perfect partner. The woman standing beside the most powerful man in the city. But now, the illusion was breaking. A quiet knock came from the door. She turned. Alexander stood there. Alive. Stronger than anyone expected. His dark suit was perfectly fitted, his tattooed neck visible beneath his collar, and his expression was colder than the night he almost died. Alexander. Her voice softened. I was so worried about you. He looked at her. Not with anger. Not yet. With disappointment. The emotion was far more dangerous. I know. 2 simple words. But Victoria felt the distance between them. The man standing in front of her was the same man she had married. Yet somehow, he felt different. You should be resting, she said. I have been resting. A pause. While other people searched for the truth. Victoria's fingers tightened slightly. What truth? Alexander walked toward the table and placed a file down. He opened it slowly. Inside were copies of security reports, financial records, and access logs. The evidence spoke. Before he did, you accessed the private wine collection before dinner. Victoria looked at the documents. Then back at him. That doesn't prove anything. No. Alexander nodded. It doesn't. A moment of silence. But this does. He placed another page on the table. A purchase record. A private transaction. A chemical compound matching the toxin found in his system. Victoria's expression changed. Only briefly. But Alexander noticed. He always noticed. The same man who built an empire by reading enemies had finally learned to read the person closest to him. Why? His voice was quiet. The question carried more pain than anger. Victoria looked away. Why do you care? Alexander froze. What? She laughed softly. You built your life around fear, Alexander. You made everyone around you afraid of you. You think being powerful means people love you? Her eyes returned to him. Nobody truly knows you. The words struck deeper than she expected, because a small part of him feared she was right. Then he remembered the person who had proven otherwise. A black waitress who had no reason to care. A woman who stood between him and death without asking for anything. Amelia. Victoria noticed the change in his expression. Her. Alexander's eyes narrowed. What did you say? The waitress. Victoria's voice became sharper. The woman you suddenly trust. The room went silent. Because in that moment, Alexander understood something. Victoria wasn't angry about Amelia's actions. She was afraid of what Amelia represented. Someone who had earned his trust without demanding power. Someone who had seen him as a person. Not a title. Not a fortune. Not a weapon. Alexander turned toward the door. You poisoned me because you wanted control. Victoria said nothing. You forgot one thing. He stopped. The person you considered insignificant was the one who saved me. For the first time, Victoria had no answer. Later that evening, Alexander returned to the dining room where everything had started. The broken glass was gone. The table was cleaned. But the memory remained. Amelia entered quietly. You should rest, she said. Alexander looked at her. A faint smile appeared. You say? That often. Because you don't listen often. For a moment, the powerful mafia boss almost laughed. Almost. Then he looked toward the empty chair where Victoria had once sat. The person closest to me tried to destroy me. Amelia remained silent. She didn't offer empty comfort. She simply stayed. And somehow, that meant more. Because Alexander Kim had spent his entire life surrounded by people who wanted something from him. But the one person who saved him wanted nothing at all. And that was the truth he would never forget. The truth had a price. And Victoria Kim was about to discover that the man she tried to destroy was no longer the same person she once controlled. The private conference room inside the Kim estate was filled with silence. No shouting, no accusations, only evidence. Alexander Kim sat at the end of the long table, his expression unreadable. His yellow-toned skin, dark suit, and tattoos visible beneath his collar reminded everyone of the man the city feared. But tonight, fear was not what filled the room. Respect was. Across from him stood Victoria, the woman who had once been beside him at every important event. The woman everyone believed was untouchable. Now she stood alone. Marcus Reed, Alexander's head of security, placed the final piece of evidence on the table. The transaction was traced to an offshore account. He looked toward Victoria, an account created under a false identity. Another document followed, but the person who funded it used a private access code belonging only to someone inside this house. Victoria remained silent. Alexander watched her carefully. Say something. Her eyes moved toward him. For a moment, she looked like the woman he had loved. Not the enemy, not the betrayer, just Victoria. Then the mask disappeared. You always were impossible to defeat. The room became colder. Alexander's expression did not change. Why? The question was simple, but it carried years of history. Victoria looked away. Because you had everything. Alexander frowned slightly. Everything. Power. Money. Fear. Her voice became sharper. Everyone respected you. A bitter smile appeared. But nobody knew you. The words lingered. Even Marcus remained silent. Because sometimes betrayal was not created by hatred. Sometimes it was created by resentment that had grown for years. Victoria stepped closer. I stood beside you while everyone admired the empire you built. I watched people fear you. But I was the only one who knew how empty it was. Alexander looked at her. And your answer was to poison me. Her eyes lowered. I thought if you were gone. She stopped. The rest did not need to be said. Alexander understood. She wanted control. The empire. The influence. The life she believed she deserved. Then Amelia entered the room. She had not intended to interrupt. She simply brought medical notes from the doctors monitoring Alexander's recovery. But she stopped when she felt the tension. Victoria looked at her, and something bitter appeared in her expression. You. Amelia remained still. The same woman Victoria had once seen as invisible. A waitress. A nobody. Yet she was standing in the middle of the room where decisions about the entire empire were being made. Alexander noticed. He noticed everything. Victoria. His voice was calm. You made the same mistake everyone else made. She looked at him. What mistake? He glanced toward Amelia. You judged someone by their position. Silence. The person you considered beneath you saved my life. Alexander turned back to Victoria, and the person who stood beside me almost ended it. No one spoke. The room held the weight of the truth. Victoria had expected anger, revenge, a punishment filled with rage. But Alexander gave her something far more powerful. A decision made without emotion. You are no longer part of my organization. Her face changed. Alexander, you will answer for what you did. No threats. No violence. Only consequences. Quiet justice. As security escorted Victoria away, Amelia watched the woman disappear down the hallway. Then she looked at Alexander. You could have been cruel. Alexander looked toward the closed door. I used to believe cruelty was strength. A pause. Now I know restraint is harder. Amelia smiled softly. For the first time, she saw not the mafia boss everyone feared, but the man hidden beneath the power. The man who had almost lost everything and gained something he never expected. Trust. And in that moment, the entire mansion understood one thing. The woman everyone ignored had changed the man everyone feared. 6 months later, the same mansion that once held betrayal and fear became a place of healing. The marble floors remained the same. The towering windows still overlooked the city. The walls still carried the history of the Kim family. But something inside had changed. The silence was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. Alexander Kim stood in the main hall, watching dozens of guests arrive for a private foundation event. Not a business meeting. Not a negotiation. Something completely different. A celebration of healing. For years, Alexander had built his reputation on power. People knew his name. They feared his decisions. They respected his influence. But very few people knew the man behind the reputation. Until Amelia Carter. The black waitress who once stood at his dinner table with nothing but courage had changed the way he saw the world. And now, she stood beside him, not as an employee, not as someone beneath him, as an equal. Amelia looked around the room with disbelief. I still can't believe this happened. Alexander looked at her. What? She smiled softly. 6 months ago, I was serving dinner. A pause. Now I'm helping create programs that will help thousands of people. Alexander nodded. You earned it. Amelia looked down. I just noticed something was wrong. And most people ignored it. His answer was quiet. But you didn't. The foundation they created focused on communities that lacked access to basic health care and support. Amelia worked with doctors, researchers, and local organizations to expand affordable care. She never forgot where she came from. She never forgot what it felt like to be overlooked. That was why people trusted her. Not because of her title, because of her heart. Across the room, Marcus Reed watched the two of them with a small smile. The transformation was impossible to ignore. The man he had served for years was still powerful, still respected, still capable of making difficult decisions. But he was no longer someone who believed strength meant standing alone. Later that evening, Alexander and Amelia walked through the quiet garden behind the mansion. The city lights reflected across the water. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Alexander stopped. Do you know what I remember most about that night? Amelia looked at him. The night I saved you. He nodded. Everyone in that room saw my position. They saw my money. They saw my power. His eyes met hers. You saw me. Amelia smiled gently. You were just a person who needed help. Those words stayed with him, because they were simple, but they were something Alexander had not heard in years. A reminder that behind every title, every reputation, every story people created, there was still a human being. A few moments later, Alexander looked toward the mansion. The old me would have searched for someone to blame. Amelia tilted her head. And now? He looked back at her. Now I search for what I can change. The answer surprised even him. The mafia boss who once believed fear was the only way to survive had learned something far more powerful. Trust, compassion, and forgiveness. As the evening ended, guests gathered outside beneath the soft glow of the garden lights. They saw Alexander Kim differently now, not only as a powerful man, but as someone who had allowed another person to change him. And they saw Amelia differently too, not as a waitress, not as someone invisible, but as the woman who reminded the most powerful man in the city that humanity mattered more than control. Because sometimes, the person everyone underestimates is the person who changes everything. And that day, everyone remembered that a kind heart can reach places that power never could. 1 year later, the world saw Alexander Kim differently. Not because he had become less powerful, not because his empire had become smaller, but because the man behind the power was no longer hidden. The Kim Foundation building stood in the center of the city, surrounded by glass walls that reflected the morning sunlight. Inside, doctors, volunteers, and community leaders moved through the halls helping people who once had nowhere to turn. And at the center of it all stood Amelia Carter. No longer the black waitress everyone overlooked. No longer the woman carrying plates while others ignored her. She was now the director of the healing initiative that had changed thousands of lives. But despite the new title, she remained the same person. The woman who stopped when someone needed help. The woman who listened before judging. The woman who saved a powerful man's life simply because it was the right thing to do. That was why people trusted her. Not because of her position, because of her heart. During the Foundation's annual gathering, hundreds of guests filled the grand hall. Doctors, employees, families, people whose lives had been changed by the programs Amelia helped create. Near the entrance, Alexander watched quietly. The same Korean Mafia boss who once walked through rooms and made people nervous now stood among ordinary people without demanding attention. His yellow-toned skin, tattoos across his neck and body, and powerful presence still reminded everyone of the man he had always been. But his eyes were different. Softer. More human. Marcus Reed stood beside him. I never thought I would see this. Alexander looked at him. See what? You. A small smile appeared on Marcus's face. The old you would have built another wall. Alexander looked toward Amelia speaking with a group of families. Maybe. A pause. But the old me didn't understand what strength really was. Later that evening, after the event ended, Alexander found Amelia standing alone outside the Foundation building. The city lights reflected against the glass behind them. You did well today, he said. Amelia smiled. So did you. Alexander raised an eyebrow. I barely did anything. Exactly. She looked at him. That is what makes it different. For a moment, Alexander said nothing. Because she was right. For most of his life, he believed leadership meant controlling everything. Every decision. Every person. Every outcome. But Amelia had taught him something no enemy ever could. Sometimes the strongest thing a person could do was trust. I used to think people only stayed because they feared leaving, Alexander admitted. Amelia looked at him. And now? He looked toward the city. Now I know some people stay because they believe in you. The silence between them was peaceful. Not empty. Not cold. Just two people who had survived something that changed both of them forever. A year ago, Alexander Kim was lying on the floor of his mansion, poisoned by the person closest to him. A year ago, Amelia Carter was just a waitress who nobody thought would matter. Nobody expected them to change each other's lives. Nobody expected kindness to defeat betrayal. Nobody expected the person with the least power in the room to become the one with the greatest influence. But that was the truth. Because wealth can create fear. Power can create obedience. But compassion creates something far stronger. Respect. And that day, everyone remembered the lesson Alexander Kim almost lost his life to learn. The person you overlook today may be the person who saves you tomorrow.